Well, John, if you can measure the president's anger by his number of tweets, this weekend he would have had steam coming out of both ears. And while he's sticking to the line that he's done nothing wrong, clearly the speed of this Democratic impeachment inquiry is beginning to get under his skin. There was more bad news today, as you mentioned there. A federal judge has ruled that he's got to turn over 8 years' worth of his tax returns. It's something that the president has vigorously defended. Now that's been rejected. Remember, this is a question that his critics have been asking since even before he was elected, that when it comes to his financial history, what does Donald Trump have to hide? And there was more pressure here in Washington today when a second whistleblower came forward alleging to have first-hand information about the president's dealings in Ukraine. Bolstering the White House defences, the president's new double-height security to ward off unwelcome intruders. Inside, Donald Trump's in defence mode too, fighting off an impeachment attack that's engulfing his presidency. House Democrats are moving at breakneck speed. They've already heard from a handful of diplomacy and intelligence key players in private hearings. 2 more current and former US ambassadors are scheduled this week. And Rudy Giuliani, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and the administration itself are all facing subpoena deadlines next week for relevant documents.
Thank you very much.
At stake, whether or not the president abused the power of his office for his own political gain by asking Ukraine's President Zelensky to investigate his political rival Joe Biden. It was a telephone call that led to a whistleblower complaint and now the 4th impeachment inquiry in US history. So far, the president's line of attack has been to dismiss the whistleblower because much of the information in the complaint came indirectly from White House officials. Second-hand, inaccurate information as the president sees it. But with the emergence of a new whistleblower, that strategy may not hold because this informant allegedly has first-hand knowledge of the president's dealings with Ukraine, and that could be potentially much more damaging. The president has predictably dismissed the new whistleblower as yet more witch hunt. And he's diving on dissent in his own ranks too. He's always had a rocky relationship with fellow Republican Mitt Romney. And after the senator from Utah described the president's behavior as wrong and appalling, things got worse. I'm hearing that the great people of Utah are considering their vote for their pompous senator Mitt Romney to be a mistake. I agree, he is a fool who is playing right into the hands of the do-nothing Democrats. Impeach Mitt Romney. A sitting senator can't be impeached. No wonder others are desperately trying to defend their president.
Is it appropriate for the president to ask China to investigate Joe Biden?
I think he's got you guys all spun up, and obviously it's the case. You've asked me the question. You've asked me the question like 4 times. I've answered it. I don't think he really meant go investigate.
Senator, because this is underlying exactly why President Trump is upset and why his supporters are upset at the news media.
Okay, this is not about the media. Senator Johnson, Senator Johnson, please. Can we please answer the question that I asked you instead of trying to make Donald Trump feel better here that you're not criticizing him?
But others, even endangered Republicans fighting to keep their seats in 2020, are beginning to shift.
Asking China to get involved in investigating a political opponent, that's completely inappropriate.
Do others feel the same way? Yet another great Republican soul-searching is underway.
Siobhan Kennedy in Washington. So earlier I spoke to the former Republican Senator Jeff Flake, who's become one of the most prominent critics of the president and who appealed last week to fellow Republicans not to support Trump's re-election bid in 2020. I asked him first whether he believed the wheels were finally coming off the Trump presidency.
Oh, we don't know. I think it's still too early for that. Right now, the majority of Republicans, the vast majority of Republicans, are still with the president. So he's got a ways to go.
When you say the vast majority, of course, the vast majority are dependent on funding that he's managed to raise in record numbers.
When I say the vast majority, I'm speaking specifically of the so-called base, or those who vote in Republican primaries. That's kind of a subset of voters, but they are very much with the president, and the politicians that represent them know that. So you're unlikely to see a break with the president until those numbers start to shift, or the evidence just comes out that's just too much for Republicans to look the other way.
Isn't there a terrible equation here in that the worse it gets, as from your point of view, the better it gets from the base, so that they really like what they see and what they get?
Yeah, I think a certain number of them like to see the president fight back, and he's been very successful at making this a binary choice and painting the other side as even more corrupt or equally corrupt, and that he's fighting for them, the voters, against this big onslaught of the deep state and everything else. So that narrative works for some people.
So can you factor into your thinking the effect, for example, of impeachment in the lower house?
It looks like the votes are there for impeachment. It's likely to get through the House and to the Senate. And then, in all likelihood, if conventional wisdom holds and the numbers hold, it won't go anywhere in the Senate. That may well, augur in the president's favor politically next year.
You would be against impeachment in the lower house at this stage, and indeed, you would prefer that it didn't happen right now. Why?
Well, I'm afraid that will embolden the president. We're pretty close to an election. By the time all this happens, we would be, in the election year, maybe January, February of next year. And I think that the president, if it doesn't go through in the Senate, would take that as vindication. I want to see the president defeated handily next year. That is my preference. Now, it could be that the evidence comes out so strongly with another whistleblower and other information that will come out, or the president's reaction to it, where the House and Senate have no choice. They just simply have to move through with impeachment and conviction. But we're not there yet.
But it sounds a little bit as if the judges in the New York courts, in demanding 8 years of his tax returns, may have a better armory than you do.
We'll see where that goes. We still don't know in the end what that will produce or if that will make any difference. But I do think that my colleagues, if this continues, if the second whistleblower or others come up with additional information, there is a line somewhere that the president will cross that will cause my colleagues to say, all right, even if I'm not going to support impeachment, I can't support him for a second term.
But today we get the really worrying news, which is the president's move on Syria. The whole idea that the Turks should be empowered to go in, replace American forces, and turn their fire not only on the Syrians, but on the Kurds, who they've sought to demolish over a period of half a century.
That is deeply concerning. And unfortunately, you've seen pushback already. I hope that pushback is strong enough to change the president's mind. It has been in the past. And unfortunately, some of my colleagues who held strong positions before the president came in on what we're doing in Syria will continue to push back, because this is extremely dangerous. And I can't imagine the fate of the Kurds, who have been so valuable in terms of turning back ISIS.
This is a terrible message. In a sense, you're saying, don't trust us.
Yes, I think that's a big concern that we have. And this has been the problem with this administration with regard to the treatment of our allies.
Add to that another 4 years if he wins, as you seem to think he probably will.
No, I don't think he will. I don't think he will. A lot of that depends on who the Democrats nominate as their nominee, but I do think that the president is certainly almost unbeatable in a Republican primary at this point, certainly. But I don't think he's invincible in the general. I think he's likely, more than likely, to lose. I hope that happens. Senator. I would rather see another Republican, but that doesn't seem to be happening right now.